Hi, I'm Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. My younger sister Jessica once looked me straight in the eyes at my going-away party and said, "Don't worry about anything back home, I've got your back completely." 11 months later, I came back from my deployment in Iraq to find her living in my apartment, sleeping in my bed, and wearing the engagement ring that my fiancé Marcus had given me. They had planned an entire wedding while I was dodging mortar rounds overseas, thinking I'd never find out because they assumed I wouldn't survive my tour. But here's what they didn't count on: I'm not just any soldier. I'm a decorated combat engineer who earned a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for leading explosive ordnance disposal missions under fire. And when it comes to planning, patience, and precision execution, they picked the wrong woman to betray. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, I was always the responsible one in the Mitchell family. While Jessica was busy getting into trouble at school, skipping classes, and bouncing from one part-time job to another, I was working my way through Arizona State University with a double major in engineering and military science. My parents, both teachers, had instilled in me the value of hard work and service to something bigger than myself. They were proud when I graduated summa cum laude and even prouder when I received my commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Army Corps of Engineers. Jessica, on the other hand, barely graduated high school and had spent the last 5 years living with our parents, working sporadically at retail jobs and dating a string of guys who never seemed to stick around. She was 24 to my 27. But sometimes it felt like I was dealing with a teenager. Still, she was my little sister, and despite our differences, I loved her fiercely. Family meant everything to me, which is probably why what happened next hurt so much. I met Marcus Rodriguez during my first assignment at Fort Hood in Texas. He was a civilian contractor working with the base's construction projects, and we met when his company was building new barracks that my unit was engineering. Marcus was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: stable, hardworking, with a great sense of humor and an easy smile that could light up a room. He was also incredibly patient with my military schedule, understanding when I had to cancel dates for training exercises or when I'd be exhausted after particularly challenging field operations. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and it was perfect. He took me to Sedona during a long weekend, and we hiked to Cathedral Rock at sunrise. As the red rocks glowed in the morning light, he got down on one knee and presented me with a gorgeous vintage-style engagement ring, a 1-carat diamond surrounded by smaller stones in an Art Deco setting that had belonged to his grandmother. The ring was absolutely stunning, and more importantly, it represented everything we'd built together and everything we planned for our future. After the engagement, I received orders for my first overseas deployment to Iraq. It wasn't unexpected. As a combat engineer specializing in explosive ordnance disposal, I knew deployments were part of the job. The mission was a 12-month rotation working with coalition forces to clear improvised explosive devices from supply routes and civilian areas. It was dangerous work, but it was also exactly what I'd trained for, and I was honored to be selected for the assignment. Marcus was supportive, even though I could see the worry in his eyes every time we talked about it. We decided to wait until after my deployment to get married, giving us time to plan the perfect wedding and allowing me to focus completely on my mission without the stress of long-distance wedding planning. We found a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in Tempe, close to his work and near my family, and I signed a year-long lease that would carry us through my deployment and into our wedding planning period when I returned. The apartment was modest but perfect for us. I'd spent weeks furnishing it with pieces that reflected both our styles: a comfortable sectional sofa in charcoal gray, a rustic dining table that Marcus had helped me refinish, built-in bookshelves that I'd filled with my engineering textbooks and his collection of classic novels. The bedroom had a view of Camelback Mountain, and we'd spend Sunday mornings drinking coffee on the small balcony, planning our future together. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and it represented the life we were building together. Jessica had been living with our parents since dropping out of community college 2 years earlier, and she seemed genuinely excited about my engagement and upcoming deployment. She'd never been particularly close to Marcus during our dating years, but she'd always been polite to him at family gatherings. Looking back, I should have noticed how her attitude toward him changed after our engagement, how she suddenly became much more interested in our relationship and our plans. When I announced my deployment at a family barbecue 3 months before I was scheduled to leave, Jessica immediately volunteered to help Marcus maintain the apartment while I was gone. She offered to check on things, help with any maintenance issues, and even assist with wedding planning by researching venues and vendors. At the time, I thought it was sweet that she wanted to be so involved, especially since she'd never shown much interest in taking on responsibility before. Marcus seemed grateful for the help, and my parents thought it was wonderful that Jessica was finally stepping up and showing some maturity. I was touched by her offer and gladly accepted, thinking it would give her some purpose and maybe help her develop a stronger relationship with my future husband. I even gave her a spare key to the apartment and added her name to my emergency contact list with the leasing office. The months leading up to my deployment were a whirlwind of preparation. There were medical exams, equipment fittings, extensive briefings about the situation in Iraq, and specialized training for the specific mission I'd be undertaking. The explosive ordnance disposal course was particularly intense. We learned to identify and safely disarm dozens of different types of improvised explosive devices, practiced working under extreme pressure, and trained to make life-or-death decisions in seconds. The psychological preparation was just as important as the technical training, as we'd be working in high-stress environments where a single mistake could be fatal. During this busy period, Jessica started spending more time around Marcus and the apartment. She'd stop by when I was at training, claiming she wanted to familiarize herself with the place so she could help more effectively while I was deployed. Marcus mentioned these visits casually, usually saying something like, "Jessica dropped off some groceries," or "Your sister helped me fix the leaky faucet in the bathroom." I was grateful that they were getting along so well and that she was already being helpful. 2 weeks before my deployment, my unit threw a going-away party at a local restaurant. All my family came, along with my closest friends and several colleagues from the base. It was a bittersweet evening. I was excited about the mission and proud to serve my country, but I was also nervous about leaving Marcus for such a long time and worried about the dangers I'd be facing overseas. Jessica gave a beautiful toast that night, talking about how proud she was of her big sister and how she admired my courage in serving our country. She spoke about family bonds and promised that she'd take care of everything on the home front so I could focus completely on my mission. She hugged me tightly afterward, and I remember feeling so grateful to have such a supportive family behind me. The night before my deployment, Marcus and I had dinner at our favorite restaurant, a small Italian place where we'd had our first official date. We talked about everything and nothing, trying to memorize each other's faces and voices. He gave me a locket with our photo inside and promised to write to me every day. I gave him a watch engraved with our engagement date and the date I was scheduled to return. We made plans for our reunion, talking about the weekend we'd spend in San Diego when I got back and how we'd start seriously planning our wedding. That last night in our apartment was perfect. We stayed up late talking about our future, making love with a tenderness born of impending separation, and falling asleep wrapped around each other. When my alarm went off at 0500 hours, Marcus drove me to the base where I'd catch my transport to the airport. Jessica met us there to say goodbye, and she cried as she hugged me, promising again that she'd take care of everything. As I watched Phoenix disappear below the plane window, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I was embarking on the most challenging assignment of my military career, but I was also leaving behind everything I loved most. I had no way of knowing that the real battle wouldn't be in Iraq, it would be for everything I'd worked so hard to build at home. The flight to Iraq took nearly 20 hours with layovers, giving me plenty of time to think about the mission ahead and the life I was temporarily leaving behind. I'd promised Marcus that I'd call or email as often as possible, and I'd already planned to set up regular video calls with both him and my family. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jessica still lived with our parents, and it wouldn't be unusual for her to invite Marcus for a family meal. But something about the way he said it, the nervous quality in his voice, made me feel uneasy. "That's nice," I said slowly. "Are Mom and Dad there too?" No, they went to visit Aunt Carol for the weekend," Marcus replied. "It's just me and Jessica tonight." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Why would Jessica invite Marcus for dinner when my parents weren't even home? And why did Marcus look so uncomfortable about it? Well, that was sweet of her to cook for you, I managed to say, trying to keep my voice normal despite the growing anxiety I felt. "Yeah, she's been really great," Marcus said, and there was something in his tone when he talked about my sister that I'd never heard before. A warmth, an affection that seemed to go beyond normal family politeness. I told him about my commendation medal, but his response felt distracted and perfunctory. He congratulated me, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. When I asked about wedding planning, he gave vague answers about being busy with work and said that Jessica was handling most of the research for us. The call ended earlier than usual, with Marcus claiming he needed to help Jessica with something in the kitchen. After the screen went dark, I sat in the communication tent for a long time, staring at the blank monitor and trying to understand the strange feelings churning in my chest. Over the next several days, I found myself analyzing every aspect of that conversation. The unfamiliar background, Marcus's nervousness, the fact that he was having dinner alone with my sister. I tried to rationalize it away. Jessica was family, Marcus was going to be family, it made sense that they would spend time together while I was deployed. But the feeling of unease persisted. I started paying closer attention to our weekly calls. Marcus seemed increasingly distracted, often glancing away from the camera as if someone else was in the room. When I asked about his work or our apartment, his answers were vague and sometimes contradictory. He'd mention fixing something that he'd supposedly fixed the week before, or he'd forget conversations we'd had about wedding plans. More troubling were the changes in our apartment that I could glimpse in the background of our video calls. The throw pillows on our couch were different, arranged in a way that I'd never styled them. There were new items on the coffee table, decorative pieces that weren't mine and that Marcus had never shown any interest in before. When I asked about these changes, Marcus would brush off my questions. "Oh, Jessica thought the place needed some updating," he'd say. "She picked up a few things to brighten it up while you're gone." The explanation made sense on the surface, but it bothered me that my sister was redecorating my home without asking my permission. More than that, it bothered me that Marcus was allowing it, that he seemed to welcome these changes. 3 months into my deployment, I received an email from Jessica that made my blood run cold. It was supposed to be one of her regular updates about the apartment's condition, but buried in the cheerful chatter about watering plants and checking mail was a single sentence that stopped me in my tracks. "Marcus has been staying here most nights now," she wrote. "It just makes sense since I'm here so often anyway, and he was getting lonely in that big apartment all by himself." I read the sentence 5 times before its full meaning sank in. Marcus was staying at my parents' house with Jessica. Sleeping there. Most nights. My hands were shaking as I typed my response. I tried to keep my tone casual, asking for clarification. About the living arrangement. Was this a recent development? How long had it been going on? Were my parents comfortable with the situation? Jessica's response came back quickly, too quickly, as if she'd been waiting for me to ask. She explained that the arrangement had started about a month ago, that Marcus had been feeling isolated and depressed living alone in our apartment. She painted herself as the caring sister-in-law who was helping my fiancé cope with his loneliness while I was deployed. But reading between the lines of her email, I began to see a different story. The way she described their daily routines, their shared meals, their evening activities, watching movies and talking until late at night. It sounded less like a sister-in-law providing support and more like a couple living together. That night, I called Marcus outside of our usual schedule. It was early morning in Phoenix, and I caught him off guard. When his face appeared on the screen, he was clearly just waking up, his hair messy and his shirt wrinkled. But what shocked me was the background behind him. He was in a bedroom I didn't recognize, with feminine decorations and photographs that were definitely not from our apartment. "Sarah," he said, looking startled. "I wasn't expecting you to call. Where are you?" I asked directly, not bothering with pleasantries. "I'm at your parents' house," he said, running his hand through his hair nervously. "I stayed over last night." "In Jessica's room?" The question hung in the air between us for several long seconds. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, guilt, and something that looked almost like relief. "It's not what you think," he said finally. "I've been having trouble sleeping alone in the apartment. Being surrounded by all your things, knowing you're so far away and in danger. Jessica offered to let me stay in the guest room here." The explanation sounded reasonable, but something about the way he delivered it felt rehearsed, as if he'd been preparing for this conversation. And I was certain that the room behind him wasn't the guest room in my parents' house. I'd spent enough time in that house to know every room, and this wasn't one of them. "Can you show me around?" The base where I'd be stationed had decent internet connectivity, and I'd been assured that communication with home wouldn't be a major problem. My deployment orders included a detailed briefing about the forward operating base where I'd be stationed. FOB Liberty was located in central Iraq and served as a hub for explosive ordnance disposal operations throughout the region. The base housed about 800 personnel from various coalition countries, and it had all the basic amenities: a mess hall, a fitness center, a small post exchange, and even a recreation room with computers for personal use. My specific assignment would involve leading a team of 4 other explosive ordnance disposal specialists in clearing supply routes and investigating suspected IED sites. The work was incredibly dangerous. Improvised explosive devices were responsible for more coalition casualties than any other threat in the theater. But it was also vital work that directly saved lives by keeping roads safe for military convoys and civilian traffic. As the plane began its descent into Kuwait, where I'd spend 2 days in processing before continuing to Iraq, I felt a surge of pride and determination. This was what I'd trained for, what I'd dedicated my life to. I was ready to serve my country and make a difference in a conflict zone where every day brought new challenges and where the work we did directly impacted the safety of our fellow service members and Iraqi civilians. I had no idea that while I was preparing to face enemies overseas, the people I trusted most were planning to become enemies at home. The betrayal that was already beginning would test me in ways that combat never could, and the skills I'd learn in Iraq, patience, tactical thinking, and precise execution under pressure, would become the very tools I'd need to fight for everything I'd built. But that morning, as I stepped off the plane into the desert heat of Kuwait, I was still Sarah Mitchell, loving sister and devoted fiancée, believing in the people I'd left behind and focused entirely on the mission ahead. The woman I'd become by the end of my deployment, hardened by betrayal but strengthened by truth, was still 11 months away. The communication tent at FOB Liberty hummed with the constant chatter of radio traffic and the clicking of keyboards as soldiers maintained contact with their loved ones back home. It was Sunday morning in Iraq, which meant Saturday evening in Phoenix, and I had my weekly video call scheduled with Marcus. These calls had become the highlight of my week, a precious hour where I could forget about the dangers surrounding our base and focus on the life waiting for me back home. I'd been in country for 6 weeks now, and the routine of deployment was beginning to feel normal. My days started before dawn with physical training, followed by mission briefings, equipment checks, and then the actual work of clearing roadside bombs and investigating suspected explosive devices. The work was methodically dangerous, requiring absolute concentration and precision, but it was also deeply satisfying. Every IED we successfully disarmed meant that convoy trucks could pass safely, that Iraqi families could travel to work or school without fear. My team had already cleared 43 suspected devices, and I'd personally led the disarmament of some of the most sophisticated improvised explosives our unit had encountered. The success had earned me recognition from our commanding officer and respect from the other EOD specialists on base. I was building a reputation as someone who stayed calm under pressure, who could make the right decisions when lives were on the line. But none of that professional success mattered as much as these Sunday calls with Marcus. I'd positioned myself at one of the computers in the far corner of the tent, where I had some privacy and where the connection seemed most stable. The screen flickered to life, and there was Marcus's familiar face, that warm smile that had first attracted me to him 3 years ago. "Hey beautiful," he said, his voice coming through with just a slight delay that reminded me of the thousands of miles between us. "How was your week?" I told him about the successful mission we'd completed on Thursday, clearing a major supply route that had been closed for 2 weeks due to suspected explosives. I couldn't give him specific details about locations or tactics for security reasons, but I could share my pride in the work we were doing and my confidence in my team. Marcus listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about my safety protocols and telling me how proud he was of what I was accomplishing. But something in his demeanor seemed different today. He kept glancing away from the camera, and there was a nervous energy in his voice that I hadn't heard before. "Everything okay back there?" I asked, studying his face on the pixelated screen. "Yeah, everything's fine," he said quickly. "Just tired from work. We're behind schedule on the new office complex, and I've been pulling long hours." I accepted the explanation, but something nagged at me. Marcus had never been the type to let work stress affect him visibly. He was usually the calm one in our relationship, the steady presence who helped me decompress after difficult training exercises or challenging days. "How's the apartment?" I asked, changing the subject. "Any problems with the plumbing or anything?" "No, no problems at all," he said, and again there was that quick, nervous quality to his voice. "Actually, Jessica's been amazing about checking on things. She stopped by yesterday to water your plants and clean the kitchen." The mention of my sister brought a genuine smile to my face. Despite her track record of irresponsibility, Jessica had been true to her word about helping out. She'd been sending me regular updates via email about the apartment's condition, and she'd even started a Pinterest board with wedding ideas that she shared with me weekly. "That's great," I said. I was worried she might lose interest after a few weeks, but it sounds like she's really stepping up. "Yeah, she's been wonderful," Marcus agreed, but something in his tone made me look more closely at his expression. There was a fleeting look in his eyes, something I couldn't quite identify, before he smiled again and changed the subject to wedding planning. We spent the rest of the call discussing venues and guest lists, and by the time we said goodbye, I felt reassured about our connection despite the strange moments earlier in the conversation. Long-distance relationships were difficult under the best circumstances, and the stress of deployment added layers of complexity that we were both still learning to navigate. Over the next several weeks, I threw myself into my work with increased intensity. We were assigned to a particularly challenging area where insurgents had been placing increasingly sophisticated explosive devices. The bombs were more complex than anything we'd encountered before, with multiple triggers and anti-tampering mechanisms that required hours of careful analysis before we could safely disarm them. The work was exhausting, both physically and mentally. Each device was essentially a deadly puzzle that demanded absolute focus and precision. A single mistake, a moment of inattention or overconfidence, could result in an explosion that would kill not just me but potentially my entire team. The responsibility was enormous, and I found myself spending my off-duty hours reviewing technical manuals and studying photographs of previous devices we'd encountered. My dedication to the mission earned recognition from headquarters. 2 months into my deployment, I was awarded the Army Commendation Medal for exceptional performance under combat conditions. The ceremony was small, just our unit gathered in the main briefing room, but the medal represented validation of everything I'd worked toward in my military career. That night, I called Marcus to share the news. I was excited to tell him about the recognition, proud of what I'd accomplished, and eager to share this milestone with the person who mattered most to me. But when his face appeared on the screen, something was immediately wrong. The background behind him wasn't our apartment. I could see unfamiliar wall decorations and furniture that I didn't recognize. "Marcus, where are you?" I asked, confused. "That doesn't look like our place." He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair and avoiding direct eye contact with the camera. "Oh, I'm at Jessica's," he said casually. "She invited me over for dinner. You know, family stuff." The explanation should have made sense. Jessica was scrambling for explanations, and each lie was worse than the last. "Well, tell him I love him and that I'll call tonight for our regular video chat," I said sweetly. "Of course," Jessica replied. "Love you too, sis." As soon as I hung up the phone, I knew with absolute certainty that my worst fears were true. Marcus and Jessica were together, living together, sleeping together, and lying to me about it while I was deployed in a combat zone. The betrayal was complete, calculated, and ongoing. But instead of falling apart, instead of crying or screaming, or calling them back to confront them immediately, I felt something else entirely. A cold, calm anger that reminded me of the feeling I got when approaching a particularly complex explosive device. It was the same mental state that had made me successful at my job, the ability to think clearly and methodically when everything around me was potentially deadly. Marcus and Jessica had made a critical error. They'd underestimated me. They thought that because I was far away, because I was focused on my mission, because I loved and trusted them, they could deceive me indefinitely. They thought I was just a lovesick soldier who would believe whatever they told me. They were about to discover that I was much more than that. I was a combat engineer trained in investigation, documentation, and precision execution under pressure. And I was about to turn those skills toward uncovering every detail of their betrayal and building a case so airtight that they'd never be able to lie their way out of it. The war in Iraq had taught me patience, strategy, and the importance of gathering intelligence before taking action. My sister and my fiancé were about to become the targets of the most thorough reconnaissance mission of my military career. And unlike the explosive devices I disarmed for a living, this was one bomb I was going to let explode. The communications hub at FOB Liberty buzzed with activity around the clock, but at 0300 hours local time, it was quieter than usual. Most soldiers were either on duty or catching what sleep they could between missions. This was exactly when I needed it to be quiet, when I could work without interruption on the investigation that had consumed every spare moment of my time for the past 2 weeks. I'd commandeered a corner workstation and spread out everything I'd gathered so far. In my years of explosive ordnance disposal work, I'd learned that successful operations required meticulous planning, careful analysis of available intelligence, and systematic documentation of every detail. Now I was applying those same principles to uncovering the truth about Marcus and Jessica. My notebook contained a detailed timeline starting from my deployment date. I documented every video call, every email exchange, every suspicious comment or behavior I'd noticed. What had started as random observations was now revealing itself as a clear pattern of deception that went much deeper than I'd initially suspected. The first breakthrough had come when I'd started cross-referencing the timestamps on Marcus's social media posts with the stories he told me during our video calls. Marcus wasn't particularly active on Facebook or Instagram, but he occasionally posted photos of his work projects or meals at restaurants. What I discovered made my stomach turn. On 3 separate occasions, Marcus had posted photos from restaurants during times when he told me he was working late shifts at the construction site. The photos showed expensive dinners, wine glasses, candlelit tables. These weren't quick meals grabbed during overtime hours. These were romantic dinners, and while Marcus was careful never to show his dining companion in the photos, I could see enough of the table settings to know he wasn't eating alone. Even more damning were the timestamps. All 3 photos had been posted on evenings when Jessica had sent me emails claiming she was checking on the apartment or helping with wedding planning. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. While I was dodging mortar fire and disarming roadside bombs, they were having romantic dinners and then lying to me about their whereabouts. But the social media evidence was just the beginning. I'd gained access to our shared cell phone account through the military's communication network, and what I found there destroyed any remaining doubt about what was happening back home. The phone records told a story that no amount of lies could explain away. Marcus and Jessica were texting each other constantly. Not just a few messages here and there, but hundreds of texts every week. They were talking more to each other than Marcus was talking to me. The pattern showed messages starting early in the morning and continuing late into the night, the kind of constant communication that only happens between people who are intimately involved. More telling were the times of these text exchanges. Many of the conversations happened during hours when Marcus had told me he was at work or when Jessica claimed to be running errands for my parents. They were in constant contact, coordinating their stories, planning their time together, and building a relationship that had nothing to do with helping his deployed fiancé. The phone records also revealed something else that hit me like a physical blow. Marcus had called Jessica within minutes of ending each of our weekly video calls. Every single time we'd spoken over the past 2 months, he'd immediately called my sister afterward. I could only imagine what those conversations contained. Were they laughing about how gullible I was? Comparing notes to make sure their stories matched? Planning their next moves while I was thousands of miles away, believing everything they told me? I'd also begun monitoring our shared bank accounts more carefully. Marcus had access to my checking account for legitimate expenses related to the apartment and wedding planning, and I'd trusted him completely with that responsibility. Now I was discovering just how much that trust had been betrayed. The bank statements revealed a pattern of spending that had nothing to do with maintaining our apartment or planning our wedding. There were frequent charges at upscale restaurants, purchases at jewelry stores, and hotel bills from weekend trips that Marcus had never mentioned during our calls. The amounts weren't huge individually, but they added up to thousands of dollars spent on activities that excluded me entirely. Most disturbing were the charges at a women's clothing boutique in Scottsdale. 3 separate purchases, each for several $100s, all made during times when Marcus claimed to be focusing on work projects. Unless Marcus had developed a sudden interest in women's fashion, he was buying clothes for someone else. And given everything else I discovered, there was only one person that someone else could be. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed more than financial records and phone logs. I needed to see them together, to catch them in the act of their deception. That's when I decided to use a technique I'd learned during my military intelligence training. If I couldn't be there in person to observe them, I'd find another way to monitor their activities. My parents' house had a security system that included cameras at the front and back entrances. The system was connected to the internet, and my father had given me the access codes years earlier in case of emergencies. I'd never used them before, but now I logged into the system to see what I could learn about Marcus and Jessica's living arrangements. What I saw on those security cameras removed any remaining doubt about their relationship. The footage showed Marcus arriving at my parents' house every evening after work, not as an occasional guest seeking comfort, but as someone who clearly lived there. I asked, "I'd love to see Mom and Dad's place through the camera." Marcus's face went pale. "They're not here right now," he said quickly. "They went out for breakfast." "That's okay, just show me the house. I miss it." "The camera's not really mobile," he said, gesturing vaguely at the computer. "It's kind of stuck in this position." I knew he was lying. The computer he was using had a detachable webcam that could easily be moved around. We'd used it before to give each other virtual tours of our respective spaces. "Where's Jessica?" I asked, changing tactics. "She's still sleeping," Marcus said, glancing nervously toward what I assumed was the bedroom door. It was 10 in the morning in Phoenix. Jessica had never been a late sleeper, even during her most irresponsible phases. She'd always been up early, usually because she had some crisis or drama that required immediate attention. The video call ended soon after, with Marcus claiming he needed to get ready for work. But as the screen went dark, I realized that everything he told me was a lie. He wasn't in the guest room. He was in Jessica's bedroom. And the way he'd glanced toward the door when I asked about her suggested that she was right there with him, probably listening to our entire conversation. I sat in the communication tent for an hour after the call ended, my mind racing through all the possibilities. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Jessica's room was being used as a temporary guest room while something was wrong with the actual guest room. Maybe Marcus really was struggling with loneliness and depression, and my sister was just providing friendly support. But deep in my gut, I knew the truth was much worse than any innocent explanation could cover. The man I loved, the man I was planning to marry, was living with my sister, sleeping in her room. And from the guilty look on his face and the lies he'd told to cover it up, I was beginning to suspect that their relationship had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. That afternoon, I skipped my usual workout and instead sat down at one of the computers with a notebook and a pen. If Marcus and Jessica thought they could deceive me while I was thousands of miles away, serving my country and risking my life, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I began documenting everything. The dates of our video calls, the inconsistencies in Marcus's stories, the changes I'd noticed in our apartment, the suspicious circumstances of Jessica's email. I noted the timeline of when Marcus had supposedly started staying at my parents' house and cross-referenced it with other details from our conversations. As I worked, a pattern began to emerge. The strange behavior had started about 6 weeks into my deployment, right around the time that Marcus had begun seeming distracted during our calls. If my suspicions were correct, that meant this betrayal had been building for over a month, hidden behind fake concern for my well-being and false promises of loyalty. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of calling Marcus directly, I called my parents' house during a time when I knew they'd be at work but when Marcus and Jessica might be there. I wanted to catch them off guard, to see their natural reactions when they weren't prepared for my contact. The phone rang 4 times before Jessica answered, her voice husky with sleep. "Hello," she said, clearly not having looked at the caller. "ID, Jess, it's Sarah," I said cheerfully. I had some free time and thought I'd call to say hi. There was a long pause, longer than there should have been for a simple greeting between sisters. "Sarah." "Hi," Jessica said, her voice suddenly bright but with an artificial quality that I'd never heard before. "How are you? How's everything over there?" "Good, really good," I said. "I hope I didn't wake you up. I know it's still pretty early there." No, I was already up," she lied. I could hear the rustling of bed sheets in the background, and what sounded like someone else moving around in the room. "Is Marcus there?" I asked casually. I tried calling our apartment, but he didn't answer. Another pause. Yeah, he's here. He stayed over again last night. Poor guy's been having such a hard time without you." "That's so sweet of you to take care of him," I said, keeping my voice warm and sisterly. "Can I talk to him?" "He's in the shower right now," Jessica said quickly. "But I'll tell him you called." I could hear a male voice in the background, muffled but definitely present. If Marcus was in the shower, who was in the room with my sister? "Actually, that sounded like him just now," I said. "Are you sure he's in the shower?" "Oh, that was just the TV," Jessica said, but her voice was getting higher and more strained. "You know how loud Dad keeps the volume. Our father had excellent hearing and never watched television loudly, especially not early in the morning." I opened a new folder on my laptop and labeled it Operation Homecoming. Inside, I began organizing all the evidence I'd gathered into a comprehensive file that would serve as the foundation for everything that was about to happen. Financial fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit marriage fraud, these weren't just personal betrayals that could be handled with angry phone calls and family drama. These were federal crimes, committed against a deployed service member, documented with the kind of thoroughness that would make any prosecutor's job simple and straightforward. Marcus and Jessica thought they were playing a game where the worst consequence would be hurt feelings and awkward family dinners. They were about to discover that they'd actually committed serious felonies against someone who knew exactly how to document evidence, build cases, and ensure that justice was served with the full weight of military and civilian law enforcement. The investigation phase was complete. Now it was time to move to the next stage of the operation. And unlike the improvised explosive devices I dealt with every day in Iraq, this was one situation where I wanted everything to explode spectacularly. Over the next several days, I began making copies of every piece of evidence I'd gathered, storing them in multiple locations and formats to ensure they couldn't be lost or destroyed. I uploaded encrypted files to secure cloud storage accounts, mailed physical copies to my own address in Phoenix through the military postal system, and even burned backup DVDs that I stored in my personal safe at the base. The evidence was comprehensive and damning, but I knew that timing would be crucial for maximum impact. Marcus and Jessica had spent months carefully planning their deception. Now it was my turn to plan their exposure with the same level of precision and attention to detail. I began studying their patterns, their schedules, their weaknesses. Jessica had always been impulsive and emotional under pressure, likely to crack and reveal more than she intended when confronted with evidence. Marcus was more calculating, but he was also fundamentally cowardly, more likely to try to shift blame than to take responsibility for his actions. But most importantly, I was learning about their timeline. Based on the marriage license application and Marcus's job applications, they were planning to make their move within the next 2 months. They wanted to be married and relocated before my scheduled return from deployment, eliminating any chance for me to disrupt their plans or claim my rightful share of our shared assets. What they didn't realize was that I had already arranged for an early return from deployment. My exceptional performance in explosive ordnance disposal operations had earned me a commendation and the opportunity to return home 3 weeks ahead of schedule for a special recognition ceremony. Marcus and Jessica were expecting me to return in 8 weeks. I would actually be home in 5. The element of surprise would be crucial to the success of Operation Homecoming. While they were finalizing their plans for a quick wedding and relocation, I would be implementing a plan that would not only expose their crimes but ensure they faced consequences that would follow them for the rest of their lives. I had never felt more focused, more determined, or more confident in my abilities. The same skills that had made me successful at disarming explosive devices were now being applied to dismantling the lives of 2 people who had betrayed me in the most complete and devastating way possible. Marcus and Jessica thought they were clever conspirators who had successfully deceived a naive soldier. They were about to learn that they had actually chosen the worst possible target for their scheme, and the countdown to their destruction had already begun. The Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers, but I moved through it with singular focus. My desert combat uniform drew respectful nods from strangers, but I barely noticed. After 11 months in Iraq, 3 weeks ahead of my scheduled return, I was finally home. The Bronze Star and Purple Heart ribbons on my chest caught the overhead lights as I walked, but my mind was entirely focused on the mission ahead. Marcus thought I was still overseas. Jessica believed she had 5 more weeks to finalize their plans. According to my intelligence gathering, they were planning to get married in 2 weeks at a small ceremony in Sedona, the same location where Marcus had proposed to me. The symmetry was nauseating, but it also meant I had them exactly where I wanted them. My first stop wasn't our apartment or my parents' house. Instead, I took a taxi directly to the law offices of Morrison, Kellner and Associates, where I had an appointment with Patricia Morrison, an attorney who specialized in military, family law and fraud cases. I'd contacted her from Iraq 2 weeks earlier, and she'd been eager to review my case after I'd sent her the preliminary evidence package. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd spent 20 years as a military lawyer before moving into civilian practice, and she understood both the legal complexities of my situation and the unique challenges faced by deployed service members. "Lieutenant Mitchell," she said, standing to shake my hand as I entered her office. "Welcome home. I've reviewed all the materials you sent, and I have to say, this is one of the most comprehensive evidence packages I've ever seen from a client. We spent 2 hours going through every detail of the case." Patricia confirmed what I'd suspected during my investigation. Marcus and Jessica had committed multiple felonies, including identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. The fact that these crimes had been committed against a deployed military member made them federal offenses with serious penalties. "The evidence you've gathered is extraordinary," Patricia told me. "Phone records, financial documents, social media posts, witness statements, security camera footage. You've basically done our investigative work for us. We can file criminal charges immediately, and I'm confident we'll also win substantial damages in civil court." But I had a different plan in mind. I wanted Marcus and Jessica to reveal themselves publicly, to be exposed in front of everyone who knew us, before the legal consequences began. Patricia understood my reasoning and helped me develop a strategy that would maximize both the public humiliation and the legal impact of their crimes. That evening, I checked into a hotel near the airport, using a credit card they had no access to. I needed to stay hidden for another few days while I put the final pieces of my plan into place. From my hotel room, I began making phone calls to family and friends, but not to reveal my presence. Instead, I was setting up the stage for their exposure. I called my parents, who were overjoyed to hear from me but confused when I told them I wouldn't be home for another week due to military paperwork delays. They mentioned that Marcus and Jessica were planning a small family celebration for my return, and that Jessica had been working hard to make sure everything was perfect for my homecoming. The irony was staggering. Jessica was planning a celebration for my return while simultaneously planning to marry my fiancé. The level of deception required to maintain both narratives demonstrated a capacity for manipulation I'd never recognized in my younger sister. Next, I called my extended family and close friends, spinning a story about wanting to surprise Marcus and Jessica by returning early. I asked them to keep my early return secret, explaining that I wanted to catch them off guard with a special surprise. Everyone was delighted to be part of what they thought was a romantic reunion story. What I was actually doing was ensuring that all the important people in our lives would be present for the confrontation I was planning. I wanted witnesses, people who would see firsthand the depth of Marcus and Jessica's betrayal and who would be able to verify the truth when they inevitably tried to spin their own version of events. The final phase of my preparation involved coordinating with Patricia Morrison and the authorities. We filed the criminal complaints on Thursday morning, 3 days after my return, timing them so that the arrest warrants would be executed during the weekend, when both Marcus and Jessica would likely be at my parents' house together. I also arranged for a locksmith to meet me at our apartment on Friday evening to change all the locks and secure my personal property. When I walked into the place Marcus and I had shared, I was struck by how different it felt. He had his own key, let himself in without knocking, and moved around the property with the familiarity of a resident. More damning was the body language between Marcus and Jessica when they appeared together in the camera footage. They weren't interacting like a grieving fiancé and a supportive sister-in-law. They were holding hands, embracing, kissing. In one particularly painful piece of footage, I watched Jessica answer the front door wearing what was unmistakably Marcus's work shirt and nothing else, greeting him with a passionate kiss before pulling him inside. The timestamp on that footage corresponded exactly with the day when Jessica had emailed me claiming she was spending the day helping our mother organize the garage. Meanwhile, Marcus had told me during our weekly call that he was working a double shift to catch up on a delayed project. Both of them had lied directly to my face while conducting their affair in my childhood home. But perhaps the most devastating discovery came when I accessed the cloud storage account that Marcus and I had set up to share wedding planning documents. I'd expected to find the venue research and vendor contacts that Jessica claimed to be working on. Instead, I found folders I'd never seen before, with names like New Life Plans and Fresh Start Documents. Inside those folders were lease applications for apartments I'd never heard of, job applications Marcus had submitted to companies in other states, and most shocking of all, a marriage license application. Not for Marcus and me, but for Marcus and Jessica. They weren't just having an affair while I was deployed. They were planning a complete future together, a future that erased me entirely from their lives. The marriage license application was dated just 2 weeks after my deployment began. While I was settling into life at FOB Liberty, learning my mission protocols and writing them love letters about our future together, they were already at the courthouse planning to make their betrayal legal and permanent. The job applications showed that Marcus was planning to relocate to Colorado, far enough from Phoenix that they could start over without running into people who knew about me. He'd applied for construction management positions in Denver and Colorado Springs, senior roles that would pay significantly more than his current job. Jessica had apparently been researching cosmetology schools in the same cities, finally planning to get the professional training she'd avoided for years. They had thought of everything. New jobs, new city, new identities as a couple who had met and fallen in love without any complicated history involving a deployed soldier sister. They were planning to vanish from my life as completely as if I'd never existed, leaving me to return from deployment to an empty apartment and a Dear John letter. But they had made one crucial mistake in their planning. They had assumed I would never find out until it was too late to do anything about it. They thought that by the time I returned from Iraq, they'd be safely established in their new life, beyond the reach of my anger or my ability to expose their deception. What they didn't understand was that my military training had taught me to gather intelligence systematically and to plan operations with the same precision they thought they were using against me. While they were amateur conspirators playing at deception, I was a professional soldier trained in reconnaissance, analysis, and strategic planning. I spent the next week expanding my investigation beyond just Marcus and Jessica. I began reaching out to mutual friends and family members, not with direct accusations, but with casual questions that might reveal how much other people knew about the situation. My conversation with my cousin Amanda was particularly enlightening. Amanda lived in Tempe, not far from my apartment, and I called her under the pretense of asking her to check on some plants I was worried about. During our conversation, I casually mentioned that Marcus had been staying with my parents to avoid loneliness. Amanda's response was immediate and telling. "Oh, is that what they're calling it?" she said, then quickly tried to backtrack when she realized what she'd implied. After some gentle questioning, Amanda revealed that she'd seen Marcus and Jessica together around town multiple times over the past 2 months. Not just running errands or grabbing coffee as family members might, but clearly on dates. She'd seen them at the movies, holding hands at the farmer's market, and dancing together at a local bar during what appeared to be a very romantic evening out. Amanda had assumed that I knew about the relationship, that perhaps Marcus and I had broken up and he'd begun dating my sister with my blessing. When I explained that I was still engaged to Marcus and had no idea about any of this, Amanda was horrified. She'd been keeping quiet out of respect for what she thought was a family situation, not realizing that she was witnessing a massive deception. The conversation with Amanda led me to reach out to other friends and family members, and slowly a complete picture began to emerge. Marcus and Jessica hadn't been particularly careful about hiding their relationship around town. They'd been acting like a couple in public, apparently confident that word wouldn't get back to me while I was deployed. My friend Claire, who worked at the bank where Marcus and I had our shared accounts, confirmed that Jessica had been added as an authorized user on our checking account. This had happened just 3 weeks into my deployment, supposedly so she could help with apartment-related expenses while I was gone. But the transaction history showed that Jessica had been using the account for personal purchases that had nothing to do with maintaining our home. Even more disturbing was what Claire told me about their behavior when they came to the bank together. They didn't act like a man and his fiancée's sister conducting business on behalf of the deployed soldier. They acted like a couple managing their shared finances, complete with intimate touches and inside jokes that made the bank staff uncomfortable. The scope of the deception was staggering. This wasn't a spontaneous affair that had developed gradually while I was away. This was a coordinated plan that had begun almost immediately after my deployment, involving financial fraud, identity theft, and the systematic erasure of my place in both of their lives. But perhaps the most painful discovery came when I finally worked up the courage to call some of our mutual friends to ask about wedding planning. I'd been wondering why no one had contacted me about venue visits or dress shopping, activities that my maid of honor and other friends should have been involved in if Jessica was really coordinating wedding plans on my behalf. What I learned was that Jessica had been telling everyone that the wedding was cancelled. She'd contacted my maid of honor, my bridesmaids, and even the vendors we'd already hired, explaining that I'd decided to focus on my military career instead of marriage. She told them that Marcus and I had mutually agreed to end our engagement and that I'd asked her to handle all the cancellations while I was deployed. My maid of honor, Katie, had been confused and hurt that I hadn't called her myself to explain such a major life decision. She'd tried to reach out to me several times, but her emails had apparently been filtered into a spam folder I rarely checked. When Katie finally connected with me and explained what Jessica had told her, I realized that my sister had been systematically dismantling my life while presenting herself as the helpful family member handling difficult communications on my behalf. The wedding venue had been cancelled, deposits forfeited. The photographer had booked other clients for our date. The flowers, the cake, the music, everything Marcus and I had carefully planned and paid for had been eliminated by Jessica, who was apparently planning to reuse many of the same vendors for her own hasty wedding to my fiancé. As I sat in the communications tent at 0400 hours, surrounded by printouts of bank statements, phone records, social media screenshots, and email conversations, I felt a cold fury unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just a relationship that had ended badly. This was theft, fraud, and conspiracy on a massive scale. Marcus and Jessica had stolen my money, my home, my relationship, and my future. They'd lied to my friends and family, forged my authorization on financial documents, and planned to disappear with everything I'd worked for while I was serving my country in a combat zone. But they had made one fatal error in their elaborate scheme. They had underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. I wasn't just a heartbroken fiancé who could be easily deceived and discarded. I was a United States Army officer with specialized training in investigation, documentation, and tactical operations. And I was about to show them the difference between amateur criminal activity and professional military precision. And why you two are standing together like a couple at a family barbecue. My mother stepped forward, confusion written all over her face. What's going on here? Jessica, why are you wearing Sarah's ring? That's when Jessica finally found her voice, but instead of confessing or apologizing, she went on the attack. Sarah abandoned Marcus, she said, her voice rising with desperation. She chose the military over him. She told us to move on with our lives. The lie was so blatant, so easily disprovable, that I almost laughed. Is that what I told you, Jessica? When exactly did I tell you that? You said it in your emails, Jessica insisted, but she was clearly scrambling. You said you didn't want to get married anymore. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. That's interesting, because I have recordings of every video call Marcus and I had during my deployment. Would you like me to play some of them for everyone? The ones where we talked about wedding planning and how much we missed each other. Marcus grabbed Jessica's arm, trying to get her to stop talking, but she was in full panic mode now. You were never coming back, she said wildly. You chose your career over us. Over your family. Jessica, I said calmly, I'm a deployed service member who completed my mission and returned home as scheduled. The only person who made choices here was you. And Marcus. That's when my Uncle Robert, who'd been listening with growing alarm, stepped forward. Wait a minute, he said. Are you two saying you're together? Romantically? Marcus finally spoke up, but instead of owning his actions, he tried to deflect blame. Sarah changed over there, he said. She became distant, focused only on her military career. We grew apart. I couldn't help but smile at that. Marcus, we talked every week. You told me you loved me and missed me. You helped plan our wedding. When exactly did I become distant? You know when, he said weakly, but he couldn't meet my eyes. That's when I decided it was time to present the evidence. I pulled out a manila folder I'd been carrying and handed it to my mother. Mom, this folder contains bank statements, phone records, social media posts, and security camera footage showing Marcus and Jessica's relationship over the past 11 months. They've been living together, spending money from my accounts, and planning to get married while telling everyone that I ended our engagement. My mother opened the folder with trembling hands and began looking through the documents. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, and finally anger. As the scope of the deception became clear. Jessica, my mother said, her voice barely controlled, is this true? Have you been lying to us about everything? I can explain, Jessica started, but I cut her off. Actually, you can explain it to the police, I said, pulling out my phone. Because what you and Marcus have done isn't just immoral, it's illegal. Identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud. All federal crimes. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. My father went to answer it, and returned with 2 Phoenix police detectives and a federal agent. I'd coordinated the timing perfectly. Lieutenant Mitchell, one of the detectives asked. We're here to execute the arrest warrants you requested. The next few minutes were chaotic. Marcus and Jessica both tried to run, but there was nowhere to go in my parents' backyard. Jessica collapsed into hysterical sobs, claiming she was pregnant and couldn't be arrested. Marcus tried to argue that everything had been consensual, that I'd given him permission to manage my finances. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the officers had reviewed everything in advance. Marcus was arrested for identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Jessica was charged with the same crimes, plus additional counts related to the forged wedding cancellations and vendor fraud. As they were being read their rights and handcuffed, Jessica made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Sarah, please, she begged. I'm your sister. Family forgives family. I looked at her for a long moment, taking in her tear-streaked face and the engagement ring that was still on her finger. You're right about one thing, Jessica. I am your sister. And as your sister, I want you to learn that actions have consequences. Real consequences. The police officers led them away as my family stood in stunned silence on the patio. After the squad cars disappeared down the street, my mother walked over to me and pulled me into a fierce hug. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, she whispered. Jessica's presence was everywhere in small ways. Different soap in the bathroom, clothes in the closet that weren't mine, photographs on the refrigerator that excluded me entirely. But the most painful discovery was in our bedroom. In the dresser drawer where I'd kept my jewelry and personal keepsakes, I found a folder containing printed emails between Marcus and Jessica dating back to just 2 weeks after my deployment. The emails were intimate, romantic, and filled with detailed plans for their future together. They'd been planning this betrayal from almost the moment I'd left for Iraq. Reading those emails was like being stabbed repeatedly, but they also provided the final pieces of evidence I needed for the legal case. The timeline they established proved premeditation and conspiracy, making their crimes more serious and the potential penalties more severe. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, perfect Arizona weather for what I had planned. I dressed carefully in my dress blue uniform, complete with all my ribbons and decorations. The uniform represented everything I was proud of about my service. And I wanted Marcus and Jessica to see exactly who they had betrayed when I confronted them. My parents were hosting their weekly family barbecue, a tradition that had been going on for years. I'd called my mother on Friday evening to confirm that both Marcus and Jessica would be there, explaining that I had a special surprise I wanted to share with the whole family. My mother was thrilled, assuming I was going to announce wedding plans or share stories from my deployment. I arrived at my parents' house at noon, parking down the street where my car wouldn't be visible from the backyard where the barbecue was taking place. I could hear laughter and conversation floating over the fence as I walked to the front door, and for a moment, the familiar sounds of family gathering made my heart ache with nostalgia for simpler times. But I squared my shoulders and rang the doorbell. My father answered, his face lighting up with joy and confusion when he saw me standing there in uniform. Sarah, what are you doing here? I thought you weren't coming home until next week. Surprise, Dad, I said, hugging him tightly. I managed to get home early. Is everyone in the backyard? Everyone's here, he said, still beaming with delight. Marcus and Jessica are going to be so shocked. Come on, let's go surprise them. As we walked through the house toward the backyard, I could hear my father calling out, "Everyone, we have a very special surprise visitor." The conversation in the backyard stopped abruptly. Through the sliding glass door, I could see my mother, my aunts and uncles, several family friends, and there in the center of the group, Marcus and Jessica standing side by side with the easy intimacy of a couple. Jessica was wearing a sundress I'd never seen before, something expensive and flattering that she definitely couldn't have afforded on her sporadic income. Marcus had his arm around her waist in a way that was definitely not brotherly or supportive. They were standing together like the happy couple they believed themselves to be. I stepped onto the patio, and the reaction was immediate and telling. My mother screamed with joy and rushed toward me for a hug. My aunts and uncles began clapping and calling out welcomes. But Marcus and Jessica went completely white, frozen in place like deer caught in headlights. "Surprise!" I said brightly, accepting hugs from family members while keeping my eyes locked on Marcus and Jessica. I managed to get home a little early. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. The silence from Marcus and Jessica was deafening in contrast to the excited chatter from everyone else. They couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't even let go of each other. Their guilty expressions were so obvious that I was amazed no one else seemed to notice. "Sarah," Marcus finally managed to stammer. "You're supposed to be, we thought you weren't coming home until next week," I finished for him. "I know. I wanted to surprise everyone. Especially you two." I walked over to them, still smiling brightly, and noticed that Jessica was wearing jewelry I'd never seen before. Expensive pieces that definitely hadn't come from her usual shopping habits. When I looked more closely, I realized she was wearing earrings that matched the engagement ring that should have been on my finger. "Jessica, those are beautiful earrings," I said conversationally. "They look like they match an engagement ring I used to have. Where did you get them?" Jessica's hand flew automatically to her neck, where she was wearing a necklace that also looked suspiciously like it belonged to a jewelry set. She opened her mouth but no words came out. That's when I noticed something that made my blood boil. Jessica was wearing my engagement ring. Not a similar ring, not a replacement ring, but my actual engagement ring with the distinctive Art Deco setting that had belonged to Marcus's grandmother. "Actually, Jessica," I said, my voice still pleasant but with an edge that made several family members look over curiously, "That's a beautiful ring you're wearing. It looks exactly like the engagement ring Marcus gave me. The one that belonged to his grandmother." The patio went silent. Every conversation stopped as family members turned to look at Jessica's hand and then at me. The tension was suddenly thick enough to cut with a knife. Jessica looked down at the ring as if she'd forgotten she was wearing it, then back up at me with an expression of pure panic. Marcus stepped slightly in front of her, a protective gesture that told everyone watching exactly what their relationship really was. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice shaking slightly, "I can explain everything." "I'm sure you can," I replied. "But first, why don't you explain to everyone here how my sister ended up wearing my engagement ring?" The secure phone line crackled with static as I placed what would be the most important call of my entire deployment. From my position in the communications bunker at Forward Operating Base Viper, surrounded by the constant hum of radio chatter and the distant rumble of convoy trucks, I was about to set in motion a chain of events that would expose Marcus and Jessica's betrayal in the most devastating way possible. It was 0400 hours local time in Afghanistan, which meant it was late evening in Phoenix. I'd deliberately chosen this time because I knew Marcus would be at his construction job's annual company party, an event he'd mentioned during our last video call. What he didn't know was that I'd already confirmed through my investigation that Jessica would be his date for the evening, attending as his girlfriend while everyone at his workplace believed she was his supportive sister-in-law helping him cope with his deployed fiancé. My hands were steady as I dialed the number for Hoffman Construction, Marcus's employer. The company's after-hours answering service connected me directly to the hotel where their party was being held. I'd researched everything about this event, from the venue to the guest list, using the same methodical approach that had served me well in explosive ordnance disposal missions. "Grand Phoenix Resort, how may I assist you?" came the professional voice of the hotel operator. "This is Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell with the United States Army, calling from Afghanistan," I said, allowing the weight of my military credentials to establish credibility. "I'm trying to reach my fiancé Marcus Rodriguez, who's attending the Hoffman Construction Company party in your ballroom tonight. This is regarding a family emergency." The operator's tone immediately became more respectful and concerned. Of course, Sergeant Mitchell. Let me connect you to the event coordinator immediately. Within moments, I was speaking with the hotel's event manager, who was clearly impressed by the military connection and eager to help. Sergeant Mitchell, we're honored to assist you. Let me personally locate Mr. Rodriguez and bring him to a private phone. This was exactly what I'd hoped for. Instead of simply having Marcus called to the phone, the entire process was creating a scene at his company party. The event coordinator would need to interrupt the festivities, make an announcement about an emergency call from Afghanistan, and escort Marcus away from the party in front of all his colleagues and their guests, including Jessica, who would be watching everything unfold while pretending to be the concerned sister-in-law. While I waited for Marcus to come to the phone, I activated the recording function on my secure military communication device. Everything that was about to happen would be documented with crystal clear audio quality, creating evidence that would be admissible in both military and civilian legal proceedings. Sarah? Marcus's voice came through the line, slightly breathless and clearly nervous. What's wrong? Is everything okay? Marcus, thank goodness I reached you, I said, injecting just the right amount of urgency into my voice. I need you to listen carefully. There's been a security breach with our bank accounts, and I need you to verify some transactions immediately. I could hear the noise of the party in the background, along with what sounded like several people gathered around Marcus, listening to his side of the conversation. Perfect. The more witnesses, the better. A security breach? Marcus repeated, his voice climbing higher with anxiety. What kind of transactions? The bank's fraud department flagged several unusual purchases made with our joint account, I explained. Large amounts spent at jewelry stores, expensive restaurants, hotel charges. They want to know if you authorized these transactions or if someone has been using our account fraudulently. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear Marcus's mind racing as he tried to figure out how to respond without admitting to the unauthorized spending in front of his coworkers. Marcus stammered, I'm not sure what you're talking about. Can we discuss this later when I'm home? Marcus, this is urgent, I pressed. The bank needs immediate verification. They specifically mentioned a purchase at Tiffany & Co. for over $3,000. Did you buy expensive jewelry recently? Another long pause. I knew Marcus was trapped. If he denied the purchase, he'd be claiming the charges were fraudulent, which would trigger a criminal investigation. If he admitted to buying expensive jewelry while his fiancée was deployed, he'd have to explain who the jewelry was for. I may have bought something small, he said carefully, but I don't remember the exact amount. $3,000. Is hardly small, Marcus, I replied. Who was this jewelry for? The bank needs to know if this was a legitimate purchase or if someone else has been using our account. I could hear whispered conversations in the background, Marcus's coworkers, clearly listening to every word of what was becoming an increasingly uncomfortable conversation. It was for you, Marcus said quickly. A surprise for when you come home. That's wonderful, I said warmly. What did you buy? I love surprises. Another trap. If Marcus claimed the jewelry was for me, he'd have to describe it. But I already knew from my investigation that he'd bought matching pieces for Jessica, jewelry she was probably wearing to the party at that very moment. Just some earrings, Marcus said vaguely. Nothing too fancy. Earrings that cost $3,000. Must be quite spectacular, I said. What do they look like? They're hard to describe, Marcus replied, his voice getting tighter with stress. Can we please talk about this when I get home? Of course, I agreed. But the bank also flagged several hotel charges in Sedona and Scottsdale. Weekend trips that I don't remember you mentioning during our calls. I had no idea. If I'd known what they were doing. It's not your fault, Mom, I said, hugging her back. They fooled everyone. That was the point. Over the next several hours, as the shock wore off, family members began sharing observations they'd had about Marcus and Jessica's relationship. My aunt had thought it was strange how comfortable they seemed together. My cousin had seen them acting like a couple at the grocery store. My uncle had wondered why Jessica suddenly had expensive clothes and jewelry. The signs had been there. But Marcus and Jessica had been skilled manipulators who'd taken advantage of everyone's trust and good intentions. They'd counted on family loyalty and social politeness to keep people from asking difficult questions. The legal proceedings moved quickly after that. Patricia Morrison proved to be as competent as I'd hoped, and the evidence I'd gathered made the prosecutor's job simple. Marcus pled guilty to avoid a lengthy trial and received 2 years in federal prison plus restitution orders for the money he'd stolen. His construction career was over, his professional licenses revoked. Jessica's case was more complicated because she tried to fight the charges, claiming she'd been manipulated by Marcus and that she was the real victim. But the evidence showed clear premeditation and active participation in the conspiracy. The emails I'd found in our apartment proved that she'd been an equal partner in planning the deception from the beginning. She eventually pled guilty when her public defender explained that going to trial would likely result in a longer sentence. She received 18 months in federal prison and 5 years probation, with restitution orders that would follow her for decades. The civil lawsuit was even more satisfying. Patricia sued them for fraud, emotional distress, and violation of my rights as a deployed service member. The damages were substantial, including not just the money they'd stolen but also compensation for the emotional trauma and the impact on my military career. Marcus had to sell his truck and liquidate his retirement accounts to pay his portion of the judgment. Jessica had no assets to speak of, but her wages would be garnished for years to come. More importantly, the civil judgment would appear on their credit reports and public records, making it difficult for them to get jobs, rent apartments, or rebuild their lives. But the most satisfying consequence was social. Word of their crimes spread quickly through our community, and they became pariahs overnight. Marcus's friends and coworkers were disgusted by his betrayal of a deployed service member. Jessica found herself completely ostracized from social groups and family gatherings. My parents changed the locks on their house and made it clear that Jessica was no longer welcome. Other family members followed suit, cutting off contact with both Jessica and Marcus. The community support network they'd expected to rely on during difficult times simply evaporated. 6 months after their arrests, I received a letter from Jessica in prison. It was a rambling, self-pitying document that blamed everyone but herself for the situation she was in. She claimed that I was vindictive and unforgiving, that I'd destroyed her life over a simple mistake. I read the letter once and then threw it away without responding. Some people never learn to take responsibility for their actions, and Jessica was apparently one of them. The letter confirmed that I'd made the right decision in prosecuting them to the full extent of the law. A year after returning from deployment, I was promoted to captain and accepted a new assignment at the Pentagon, working in explosive ordnance disposal training and development. The experience with Marcus and Jessica had taught me valuable lessons about trust, verification, and the importance of thorough investigation before making important decisions. I also met someone new, another Army officer who understood the demands of military service and who valued loyalty and honesty above all else. David was a helicopter pilot who'd done 3 combat tours, and he appreciated what I'd been through both overseas and at home. Our relationship developed slowly and carefully, built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than convenience or circumstance. When David proposed to me on the anniversary of my return from Iraq, I said yes with complete confidence in our future together. The wedding was everything my original wedding to Marcus should have been. My real friends were there, family members who'd supported me through the legal proceedings, and fellow service members who understood the sacrifices we'd all made. There were no lies, no hidden agendas, no family members plotting behind the scenes. Jessica and Marcus were both still in prison when David and I got married. I'd heard through family members that they'd broken up while incarcerated, each blaming the other for their legal troubles. The perfect love story they thought they'd been writing had revealed itself to be nothing more than a criminal conspiracy based on mutual selfishness and betrayal. Looking back on the entire experience, I'm grateful for the lessons it taught me. I learned that my military training wasn't just useful in combat situations, but also in civilian life when careful analysis and strategic thinking were required. I learned that justice isn't always immediate, but it's worth fighting for when the stakes are high enough. Most importantly, I learned the difference between family members who deserve loyalty and those who abuse it. Jessica will always be my biological sister, but she chose to forfeit any claim to familial loyalty when she decided to betray me while I was serving my country. The house David and I bought together is filled with photographs from our military service, awards and commendations we've earned, and mementos from our travels around the world. There are no pictures of Marcus or Jessica, no reminders of the betrayal I survived and overcame. Sometimes people ask me if I regret being so hard on them, if I think the legal consequences were too severe for what they'd done. My answer is always the same. They didn't just break my heart or end a relationship. They committed serious crimes against a deployed service member, stealing money and property while I was in a combat zone where I could have been killed at any moment. Their actions weren't just personal betrayals, they were attacks on the trust and support system that military families depend on. They deserved every consequence they received, and I sleep soundly at night knowing that justice was served. The experience also taught me about resilience and the power of systematic preparation. Marcus and Jessica thought they could destroy my life while I was powerless to stop them. Instead, they provided me with the motivation to apply my military skills to civilian problems, resulting in their complete downfall and my eventual triumph. Today, I teach courses on operational security and personal protection to deploying soldiers, helping them understand how to safeguard their finances, relationships, and personal affairs while overseas. The lessons I learned from my own experience have helped dozens of other service members avoid similar betrayals or respond effectively when they occur. I've never spoken to Marcus or Jessica since their arrests, and I never will. They made their choices and faced the consequences. I made mine and built a better life than I ever could have imagined when I was engaged to a man who turned out to be a criminal and trusting a sister who turned out to be a fraud. The military taught me that some battles are worth fighting with everything you have, and some victories are worth whatever they cost to achieve. The battle for my dignity, my future, and my sense of justice was one of those fights, and I won it completely. Were those business trips? The background noise at the party had gotten quieter, as if people were straining to listen to Marcus's increasingly uncomfortable conversation with his deployed fiancée. Those might have been work-related, Marcus said unconvincingly. I'm sure your boss would remember authorizing expensive weekend trips to resort hotels, I said. Is he there tonight? Maybe he could verify those business expenses for the bank. No, that's not necessary, Marcus said quickly. Look, Sarah, this really isn't a good time for this conversation. I understand you're at a party, I said sympathetically. Jessica mentioned it when I talked to her earlier. She said she was looking forward to meeting your coworkers. Is she enjoying herself? I could hear Marcus's sharp intake of breath at the mention of Jessica being at the party. He'd been trying to avoid talking about her presence, but now he had to acknowledge that his supposed sister-in-law was his date for the evening. She's having a nice time, Marcus said carefully. I'm so glad, I replied. It's wonderful that she's been able to support you during my deployment. The jewelry you bought, the weekend trips, it sounds like you two have been keeping each other company while I've been overseas. The implication was clear, and I could hear nervous shuffling in the background as Marcus's coworkers began to understand what they were witnessing. Sarah, you're misunderstanding the situation, Marcus said desperately. Am I? I asked innocently. Help me understand then. Explain how my sister ended up as your date tonight while you're spending thousands of dollars from our joint account on jewelry and romantic getaways. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I can explain everything when you get home. I'm sure you can, I said calmly. In fact, I'm looking forward to hearing your explanation very soon. Much sooner than you think. What do you mean? Marcus asked, a note of panic creeping into his voice. I mean my deployment status has changed, I said. I'll be home in 2 weeks instead of 6. Surprise. I could hear what sounded like something being dropped on the other end of the line, followed by urgent whispered conversations. 2 weeks? Marcus repeated weakly. That's right. So whatever plans you and Jessica have been making, whatever you thought you had time to accomplish, you might want to reconsider. I'll see you very soon, Marcus. Both of you. I ended the call and immediately began documenting everything that had just happened. The conversation had been recorded in its entirety, capturing Marcus's admissions about the jewelry purchase, his inability to explain the hotel charges, and most importantly, his failure to deny that Jessica was his date for the evening. But more than the audio evidence, I'd just accomplished something far more valuable. I'd publicly exposed their relationship in front of Marcus's entire workplace, creating witnesses who would remember this conversation for years to come. Marcus would return to the party to face questions from colleagues who'd heard enough to understand that something inappropriate was happening between him and his fiancée's sister. Jessica would have to maintain her act as the supportive sister-in-law while knowing that their secret was no longer secret, that people were watching them with suspicion and judgment. The stress of maintaining their deception had just become exponentially more difficult. Over the next few days, I received confirmation that my strategy had worked exactly as planned. My cousin Amanda called me, having heard about the incident through the local gossip network that connected various social circles in Phoenix. Sarah, what happened at Marcus's work party? Amanda asked. I heard there was some kind of dramatic phone call from you that made everyone uncomfortable. I needed to verify some suspicious banking activity, I said truthfully. Marcus seemed surprised by my questions about some expensive purchases he'd made. People are saying that Jessica was there with him, Amanda continued. And that after your call, they left the party together looking really upset. Some of his coworkers were asking questions about their relationship. This was exactly the social pressure I'd hoped to create. Marcus and Jessica could no longer move freely through their social circles without people watching them, questioning their interactions, and speculating about the true nature of their relationship. I continued my systematic investigation from Afghanistan, but now I was also psychological pressure campaign designed to make their deception increasingly difficult to maintain. Every few days, I would make contact with different people in their social network, always with innocent-seeming questions that actually planted seeds of suspicion. I called Jessica's former coworker to ask about sending her a care package, mentioning that she seemed to be spending a lot of time away from my parents' house lately. I contacted our mutual friend Katie to discuss wedding planning, expressing confusion about why Jessica had told the photographer that our engagement was off. Each conversation created ripple effects through our social network. People began comparing notes, sharing observations, and asking direct questions that Marcus and Jessica found increasingly difficult to answer without revealing the truth about their relationship. The pressure was working. Jessica's behavior became more erratic and defensive. She started avoiding family gatherings and declining invitations to social events where she might face uncomfortable questions. Marcus became isolated at work, where colleagues now viewed him with suspicion and disapproval. But I wasn't content to simply make their lives uncomfortable. I wanted complete justice, and that required expanding my investigation beyond just documenting their relationship. I needed to prove that they'd committed specific crimes that would result in serious legal consequences. Using my military access to secure communication networks, I began building connections with law enforcement and legal professionals who could help me understand exactly what charges could be filed against Marcus and Jessica. I contacted the Arizona Attorney General's office, explaining that I was a deployed service member who believed she was the victim of identity theft and financial fraud. The response was immediate and supportive. Crimes committed against deployed military personnel were taken very seriously by both state and federal authorities. I was connected with Detective Lisa Chen from the Phoenix Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, a specialized investigator who had extensive experience with cases involving military families. Detective Chen reviewed the evidence I'd gathered and confirmed that Marcus and Jessica had committed multiple felonies. The unauthorized use of my bank accounts constituted wire fraud and identity theft. Their use of my personal information to cancel wedding vendors and make false statements about my intentions constituted conspiracy to commit fraud. Most seriously, their plan to get married using my financial resources while I was deployed constituted a violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, a federal crime with severe penalties. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, Detective Chen told me during one of our secure phone conversations, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of fraud against a deployed service member that I've ever seen. The evidence you've gathered is extraordinary, and the federal prosecutors I've spoken with are very interested in pursuing charges. We began coordinating a plan for my return to the United States. Instead of the quiet homecoming that Marcus and Jessica were expecting, my arrival would trigger a carefully orchestrated law enforcement operation designed to catch them in the act of their crimes and secure additional evidence for prosecution. Detective Chen arranged for surveillance of my apartment and my parents' house, documenting Marcus and Jessica's daily routines and their use of my property. The surveillance team captured video evidence of them living together as a couple, using my belongings, and making decisions about my property as if they owned it. More importantly, the surveillance team witnessed Jessica wearing my engagement ring in public, providing visual proof of theft that would be impossible for her to explain away in court. I also worked with military legal affairs to ensure that my early return from deployment would be handled in a way that maximized the impact on Marcus and Jessica's criminal case. Instead of simply flying home and surprising them, I would be returning as part of an official military ceremony honoring soldiers who had distinguished themselves during deployment. The ceremony would be covered by local media, creating a public record of my return and my military achievements. This would make it impossible for Marcus and Jessica to later claim that I had abandoned them or chosen my military career over our relationship. As my return date approached, I received increasingly desperate communications from both Marcus and Jessica, though they didn't coordinate their stories well enough to avoid contradicting each other. Marcus sent me long emails claiming that he'd been depressed and lonely during my deployment, that he'd made some poor financial decisions but that everything could be worked out when I returned. He painted himself as a victim of circumstances, overwhelmed by the stress of having his fiancée in a combat zone. Jessica's approach was different. She sent me emotional messages about how proud she was of my military service, how much she'd missed having her big sister around, and how excited she was for my homecoming. She made no mention of Marcus or their relationship, as if she could simply ignore that aspect of the situation until it went away. Neither of them seemed to understand that I already knew everything about their betrayal and that their attempts to manipulate my emotions were actually providing additional evidence of their deceptive behavior. 2 days before my scheduled return, I made one final call to Phoenix. This time, I called my parents' house at a time when I knew both Marcus and Jessica would be there, but when my parents would be at work. Jessica answered the phone, her voice bright and cheerful in a way that immediately raised my suspicions. "Sarah, how are you? We've all been so excited about you coming home." "I'm great, Jess," I replied. "Actually, I'm calling because I have some wonderful news to share with you and Marcus." "Is he there?" "Yes, he's right here. Let me put you on speaker so we can both hear your news." I waited until I could hear both of their voices clearly before continuing. "I wanted you both to know that I've been recommended for the Bronze Star Medal for my work here in Afghanistan," I said. "The ceremony is going to be held at Luke Air Force Base when I get home, and there will be media coverage." "That's amazing," Jessica said, though I could detect a note of anxiety beneath her enthusiasm. "We're so proud of you." "Thank you," I replied. "The thing is, the ceremony is going to be much bigger than originally planned. The base commander wants to use it as an opportunity to honor several returning soldiers, so there will be television coverage and newspaper interviews." I paused, letting the implications sink in. I've been asked to talk about what kept me motivated during deployment, what I was fighting for back home. I'm planning to talk about the importance of family loyalty and trust, about how knowing that the people you love are supporting you makes it possible to do dangerous work in service of your country. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I'm also going to talk about how betraying a deployed service member isn't just a personal crime, it's an attack on our entire military system, I continued. When someone steals from a soldier who's in combat, when they lie to a service member who's risking their life for their country, they're undermining the trust that makes military service possible. "Sarah," Marcus said carefully, "what exactly are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that when I get home, everyone is going to be watching," I replied. "The media, military leadership, local law enforcement. Everyone will be interested in my story, in what I've been through, and in how my family and loved ones supported me during my deployment." Another long pause. "I hope that when people ask about how you two took care of things while I was gone, you'll have good answers to give them," I said sweetly. "Because I have a feeling there are going to be a lot of questions." I ended the call and smiled with satisfaction. Marcus and Jessica now knew that their crimes were going to be exposed in the most public way possible, in front of media cameras and military officials who would have no tolerance for people who betrayed deployed service members. They had less than 48 hours to figure out how to explain away 11 months of systematic deception, theft, and betrayal. And I knew they would panic, make mistakes, and provide even more evidence of their crimes as they desperately tried to cover their tracks. The final phase of Operation Homecoming was about to begin, and Marcus and Jessica were walking directly into a trap that had been 11 months in the making. As I prepared for my journey home from Afghanistan, I reflected on how much I'd learned about myself during this deployment. I discovered that I was capable of facing enemy fire without flinching, of making life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure, and of leading other soldiers through dangerous missions with confidence and skill. But I'd also learned that I was capable of something else entirely. When the people I trusted most had betrayed me in the most devastating way possible, I'd channeled my pain into a systematic campaign of investigation and justice that would expose their crimes and ensure they faced appropriate consequences. Marcus and Jessica had thought they were clever manipulators who could deceive a naive soldier serving overseas. Instead, they'd chosen the worst possible target for their schemes. They'd betrayed someone with the training, resources, and determination to not just discover their crimes, but to document them so thoroughly that justice would be swift and complete. In less than 2 days, I would be standing on American soil again, wearing my dress uniform with the Bronze Star Medal on my chest, surrounded by family, friends, media, and law enforcement officials who would witness the final chapter of this story. Marcus and Jessica's betrayal had taught me that biological family isn't always trustworthy, but it had also shown me that chosen family, the bonds formed through shared service and mutual respect, could be unbreakable. My fellow soldiers, my military chain of command, and even law enforcement officials I'd never met had rallied to support me when they learned about the crimes committed against me during my deployment. The homecoming ceremony would be a celebration of military service and sacrifice, but it would also be a reckoning for two people who had thought they could steal from a deployed soldier without consequences. I was ready for both. The morning Arizona sun blazed overhead as I stepped off the military transport aircraft at Luke Air Force Base, my boots hitting American soil for the first time in 11 months. The familiar desert heat wrapped around me like an embrace, but my focus remained laser-sharp on the mission ahead. Today wasn't just about homecoming ceremonies and Bronze Star presentations. Today was about justice. Detective Lisa Chen stood near the terminal building, easily identifiable by her professional demeanor and the slight nod she gave me as our eyes met across the tarmac. We'd coordinated this moment down to the minute during our secure communications over the past week. While the base prepared for the media ceremony honoring returning heroes, law enforcement was positioning for an operation that would expose Marcus and Jessica's crimes in the most public and devastating way possible. The ceremony itself was scheduled for 1,400 hours, giving us exactly 3 hours to execute the first phase of what I'd privately dubbed Operation Reckoning. Marcus and Jessica believed they had until this evening to prepare for my return, thinking I'd arrive on a commercial flight like most returning soldiers. They had no idea I was already here, already coordinating with authorities, already setting their downfall in motion. Detective Chen approached me as I collected my gear, her expression professional but supportive. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, welcome home. Everything is in place exactly as we discussed. The surveillance team confirmed that both subjects are currently at your parents' residence, apparently preparing some kind of welcome home gathering. The irony was perfect. While Marcus and Jessica scrambled to stage a fake celebration of my return, complete with decorations and a carefully rehearsed performance of their fake concern for my well-being, law enforcement was preparing to document their crimes in real time. What's the status on the search warrants? I asked, shouldering my deployment bag with the same efficiency I'd used for countless missions overseas. Signed and ready, Chen replied. We have authorization to search your apartment, your parents' house, and both of their vehicles. The federal prosecutors are standing by to file charges the moment we have them in custody. As we walked toward the unmarked police vehicle that would take me to the first location, I felt the familiar calm that had served me well during explosive ordnance disposal missions. Every detail had been planned, every contingency considered, every possible escape route for Marcus and Jessica systematically eliminated. Our first stop was my apartment, the place Marcus and I had shared before my deployment, the home they'd been living in and gradually transforming to suit their new relationship. Detective Chen had obtained keys from the property management company, along with documentation proving that Jessica had fraudulently added herself as an authorized resident using forged documents. Walking into my own home felt surreal after 11 months away, but the changes were immediately obvious and deeply unsettling. The furniture had been rearranged to accommodate 2 people living as a couple rather than one person waiting for his fiancée's return. Jessica's belongings were everywhere in the bedroom, bathroom, and closet, clear evidence that she'd been living here full-time despite having no legal right to the residence. But it was the kitchen that provided the most damning evidence. Pinned to the refrigerator with magnets were wedding planning documents that made my blood run cold. Not plans for my wedding to Marcus, but detailed preparations for Marcus and Jessica's ceremony, scheduled for next weekend at a resort in Sedona. The same resort where Marcus had proposed to me, where he'd promised to love and honor me for the rest of his life. The wedding folder contained everything they'd need for their illegal ceremony. A marriage license application with falsified information claiming Jessica was divorced and Marcus was single. Vendor contracts for flowers, photography, and catering, all paid for with funds stolen from my accounts. Even invitations addressed to family members and friends, announcing the marriage of Marcus and Jessica with no mention of me or the engagement they were destroying. Detective Chen photographed every document while I provided commentary about the financial accounts they'd used and the significance of various pieces of evidence. The wedding planning folder alone contained proof of conspiracy, fraud, and identity theft on a massive scale. In the bedroom, we found even more evidence of their deception. Jessica had completely taken over my side of the closet, hanging her clothes where mine used to be and storing her personal items in my jewelry box. She'd even replaced our engagement photos with pictures of herself and Marcus, as if she could simply erase me from our shared history by removing visual reminders of my existence. The most painful discovery was in Marcus's dresser drawer, where I found a letter he'd apparently written but never sent. The letter was addressed to me and dated just 2 weeks after my deployment began. In it, Marcus explained that he'd fallen in love with Jessica and that their relationship was meant to be. He wrote about how my military career had changed me and how Jessica understood him in ways I never could. The letter revealed that their affair hadn't been a gradual development or a moment of weakness during a difficult time. It had been a calculated decision made almost immediately after I left for Afghanistan, while I was still adjusting to life in a combat zone and writing him love letters about our future together. But the letter also contained something even more valuable than emotional devastation. It included specific details about their financial crimes, including Marcus's admission that he'd been borrowing money from our joint accounts to fund their relationship and his plan to handle the financial situation before my return. In legal terms, it was a written confession to multiple felonies. After documenting everything at the apartment, we drove to my parents' house, where Marcus and Jessica were apparently putting the finishing touches on their elaborate deception. The surveillance team had been monitoring the property for the past week, capturing video evidence of their daily routines and their behavior when they thought no one was watching. Detective Chen parked down the street where we could observe the house without being seen. Through high-powered binoculars, I could see movement in the backyard where Jessica was hanging decorations for what appeared to be a welcome home party. The sight of her casually preparing to celebrate my return while wearing stolen jewelry and planning to marry my fiancé would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. The timing is perfect, Detective Chen observed. They're completely focused on their preparations and have no idea we're here. When we execute the search warrant, we'll catch them with all the evidence in plain sight. At exactly 1,300 hours, 1 hour before my scheduled medal ceremony, Detective Chen gave the signal to the tactical team positioned around my parents' property. The operation unfolded with military precision as officers approached from multiple directions, preventing any possibility of escape or evidence destruction. I remained in the surveillance vehicle as law enforcement announced their presence and began executing the search warrants. Through radio communication, I could hear the chaos and confusion as Marcus and Jessica realized their carefully constructed world was collapsing around them. "We have both subjects in custody," came the voice of the lead officer. Female suspect was attempting to flush documents down the toilet when we entered. Male suspect was trying to delete files from a laptop computer. Their panicked attempts to destroy evidence only provided additional proof of their consciousness of guilt. Innocent people don't try to eliminate documentation when police arrive. Criminals do. Over the next hour, while law enforcement methodically searched both locations, I received updates about each piece of evidence they discovered. The fake wedding documents at my apartment were just the beginning. At my parents' house, they found detailed financial records showing exactly how much money Marcus and Jessica had stolen, including spreadsheets tracking their spending on romantic getaways, expensive dinners, and jewelry purchases. They also discovered something I hadn't expected but probably should have: a detailed timeline of their relationship that Jessica had apparently been keeping as some kind of romantic memento. The timeline began 2 days after my deployment and included entries about their first kiss, their first night together, and their decision to start planning our future. Reading those entries over Detective Chen's shoulder was like being stabbed repeatedly, but it also provided irrefutable proof that their relationship had been ongoing for almost my entire deployment. There could be no claims of recent developments or emotional mistakes made under stress. This had been a systematic betrayal planned and executed from the moment I left the country to serve in a combat zone. But the most satisfying discovery came when officers found Jessica's personal journal hidden in her childhood bedroom. The journal contained detailed entries about her jealousy of my military success, her resentment that Marcus had chosen me over her, and her deliberate plan to steal everything Sarah thinks she deserves. One entry, dated just 3 months into my deployment, was particularly damning. "Marcus is so easy to manipulate when he's lonely. I just have to keep reminding him how Sarah has abandoned him for her precious military career. Soon he'll forget all about her and realize I'm the sister he should have chosen from the beginning." The journal revealed that Jessica's betrayal wasn't just about stealing my fiancé. It was about destroying my entire life out of sibling rivalry and jealousy that had apparently been building for years. She'd seen my deployment as an opportunity to take everything I'd worked for and prove that she was better than her successful older sister. As the search concluded and Marcus and Jessica were formally charged with multiple felonies, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I'd accomplished. 11 months of systematic investigation, careful evidence gathering, and strategic planning had resulted in complete justice. They would face serious prison time, massive financial penalties, and social consequences that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The medal ceremony proceeded as scheduled, with local news cameras capturing my Bronze Star presentation while Marcus and Jessica sat in holding cells waiting for their arraignment. When reporters asked about what had sustained me during my difficult deployment, I spoke honestly about the importance of integrity, loyalty, and justice. "Service members sacrifice everything to protect our country," I told the assembled media. "When people back home betray that sacrifice by stealing from deployed soldiers or lying to military families, they're not just committing crimes against individuals. They're attacking the foundation of trust that makes military service possible." I never mentioned Marcus and Jessica by name during the ceremony, but I didn't need to. Their arrests had already been reported by local news outlets, and the connection between their crimes and my homecoming was obvious to everyone watching. The legal proceedings moved swiftly after that. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of lengthy federal trials, both Marcus and Jessica accepted plea agreements rather than fight charges they couldn't possibly win. Marcus received 3 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay full restitution for all the money he'd stolen. Jessica got 2 years and a lifetime of supervised probation for her role in the conspiracy. More importantly, their convictions became public records that would follow them forever. Future employers, landlords, and potential romantic partners would be able to see exactly what kind of people they were and what they'd done to a deployed service member. The civil lawsuit I filed with the help of military legal aid was even more satisfying. In addition to recovering all the stolen money, I was awarded damages for emotional distress, damage to my military career, and the cost of the wedding they'd destroyed. The financial judgment was large enough to impact their lives for decades, ensuring they'd never forget the consequences of their betrayal. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the response from the military community and my fellow service members. My story became a case study used in pre-deployment briefings about protecting yourself from financial fraud while overseas. Other soldiers who'd experienced similar betrayals reached out to share their own stories and thank me for showing that justice was possible. 6 months after returning from deployment, I was promoted to captain and received orders for a prestigious assignment at the Pentagon, working on counterterrorism initiatives that drew directly on my combat experience in Afghanistan. The betrayal that was supposed to destroy my life had actually strengthened my resolve and proven my capability under the most extreme personal stress. I also met someone new, another Army officer who understood the demands of military service and who valued loyalty above all else. Captain David Thompson was a helicopter pilot with multiple combat tours, and he appreciated both my professional accomplishments and my personal strength in overcoming the challenges I'd faced. Our relationship developed slowly and carefully, built on mutual respect, shared values, and complete honesty about our past experiences. When David proposed to me on the first anniversary of my return from Afghanistan, I said yes with absolute confidence in our future together. Our wedding was everything my original wedding to Marcus should have been, but better because it was based on genuine love and trust rather than convenience and deception. Fellow soldiers served as honor guards, my parents walked me down the aisle with pride and relief, and there were no family members plotting betrayals or hidden agendas threatening our happiness. Marcus and Jessica were both still serving their prison sentences when David and I got married. I'd heard through family members that they'd broken up while incarcerated, each blaming the other for their legal problems and completely destroying whatever genuine feelings might have existed between them. The perfect love story they thought they were creating had revealed itself to be nothing more than a criminal conspiracy based on greed, jealousy, and mutual selfishness. Without the shared goal of betraying me to unite them, they'd quickly discovered they had nothing in common except a willingness to hurt other people for personal gain. Looking back on the entire experience now, 5 years later, I'm grateful for the lessons it taught me about resilience, justice, and the importance of thorough preparation when facing any kind of threat. The same methodical approach that made me successful at disarming explosive devices also served me well when dismantling the lies and crimes of people who'd betrayed my trust. I learned that blood relationship doesn't guarantee loyalty, but shared values and mutual respect can create family bonds stronger than genetics. My military family, my chosen family, proved more trustworthy and supportive than the biological sister who'd tried to destroy my life out of jealousy and spite. Most importantly, I learned that justice isn't always immediate, but it's worth fighting for when the stakes are high enough. Marcus and Jessica thought they could steal my life while I was serving my country overseas, but they underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. I wasn't just a heartbroken fiancé who could be easily deceived and discarded. I was a United States Army officer with specialized training in investigation, documentation, and tactical operations. When they chose to betray me, they unknowingly declared war on someone who was professionally trained to win conflicts through superior planning and execution. Today, David and I live in a house filled with photographs from our military service, awards and commendations we've earned together and separately, and mementos from travels around the world. There are no pictures of Marcus or Jessica, no reminders of the betrayal I survived and overcame. Sometimes people ask if I regret being so thorough in pursuing legal consequences, if I think the punishment was too severe for what they'd done. My answer is always the same: they didn't just break my heart or end a relationship. They committed serious federal crimes against a deployed service member, stealing money and property while I was in a combat zone where I could have been killed at any moment. Their actions weren't just personal betrayals. They were attacks on the trust and support system that military families depend on. They deserved every consequence they received, and I sleep peacefully knowing that justice was served completely and appropriately. The experience also taught me about the power of systematic preparation and patience when facing seemingly impossible odds. Marcus and Jessica thought they held all the advantages while I was thousands of miles away and focused on military missions. Instead, they provided me with the motivation to apply professional military skills to civilian problems, resulting in their complete downfall and my ultimate triumph. I now teach operational security courses to deploying soldiers, helping them understand how to protect their finances, relationships, and personal affairs while overseas. The lessons I learned from my own experience have helped dozens of other service members avoid similar betrayals or respond effectively when they occur. The military taught me that some battles are worth fighting with everything you have, and some victories justify whatever they cost to achieve. The battle for my dignity, my future, and my sense of justice was definitely one of those fights, and I won it so completely that Marcus and Jessica will never recover from the consequences of underestimating me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.